Dear friends, Namaskar and welcome back. I am your teacher Ashok Rajguru, and in this video we shall take a brief look at the process of elections for a society. And this will give you a fair idea whether or not you are election ready. Remember, after the 97th Amendment to the Indian Constitution, cooperative housing societies have the same status, stature and importance like the Gram Panchayat or the municipal corporation. They are statutory bodies and they have powers which they can exercise like those two bodies I mentioned. Elections are in fact the very foundation of any democratic process, and that is one of the 7 guiding principles for cooperatives which we saw in the first video. The basis of any democratic institution are free and fair elections. There's a notification to the Maharashtra Cooperative Societies Act 1960 dated 11th of September 2014. By means of this notification, the government is informed that a state cooperative election authority has been formed. This authority is responsible for conducting elections in all cooperative societies. As we have seen in one of the initial slides, there are more than 5 crore members and there are more than 2 lakh cooperative societies. They range from very small cooperative housing societies to very large societies running milk federations, agricultural cooperatives, and so many other business ventures like cooperative banks. So the State Cooperative Election Authority is something like your Central Election Commission, but this is entrusted with elections for the local bodies like cooperative societies. And the rules are equally strict. So let's take briefly a look at what is expected of us as a cooperative society when it comes to elections. The powers are exercised by the District Deputy Registrar, or the DDR as the person is called. We live in a society which is a Type C cooperative housing society, and it is designated as Type C because it has got 200 or more members. We must understand that there is a long process of preparation that goes in before the elections, and this is best understood by looking at the forms of the SCEA that are involved. These forms are numbered and they start with the letter E. So while we are watching this program, you will be able to see that this process actually progresses from one form to another. So the first one is that the managing committee prepares a form E2 and delivers it to the DDR 6 months before the expiry of the managing committee's term. Now a question could be asked, what is form E1? And we shall come to that towards the end of the program. So please remember 6 months. Now 4 copies of these hard copies, printed copies, and a digital copy of the electoral rolls have to be submitted to the DDR 120 days, that's about 4 months before the expiry of the term. If the managing committee fails to do so, then the State Cooperative Election Authority will prepare the list, and the expenses that go into it will be recovered from the managing committee members. So these are 2 deadlines you must remember. 120 days before the expiry of the term, the electoral rolls have to be prepared and submitted to DDR. And the second thing is, if they are not done, then all the costs will be recovered directly from the managing committee members, not from the society. So that is a responsibility of the managing committee members. We shall now take a look at the process. And as I mentioned earlier, one way to follow the process is by following the sequence of the form numbers. We have talked about E2 earlier, so we begin with form E1. This is a form which is prepared by the DDR, and the Election Commission has a copy of that, and it records the society name and the due dates for elections. E2 is prepared by the society and it submits the managing committee members' details 6 months before the due date. E3 are the electoral rolls, or it's a provisional list of voters which is supposed to be submitted 120 days before the due date of elections. So there you are, 6 months earlier, before the due date, the managing committee has to begin its dialogue with the DDR's office, which is our point of contact for the SCEA. The provisional list is to be prepared 4 months before the due date of elections. And then there is a form number E3-1. And this is the final list after the claims and objections to the names that have been published in E3 have been settled. Continuing further, Form E4 is then the form which the Election Commission sends to the society and it details the election program. E5 is a form that relates to nomination forms. These are filed by the candidates declaring their candidature to the Election Commission. E6 is a form which is for withdrawal of candidature, and there is a timeline when this can be done. E7 is the final list of the contesting candidates. So you will recall E3-1 is the list of voters that has been finalized after settling all the claims and corrections, and E7 is the final list of contesting candidates. Continuing further, E8, the election agents are appointed by candidates on this form. So usually this applies to large cooperative societies where elections are taking place in various locations. So just as you have for the general elections or for the state elections or municipality elections, the candidates can appoint election agents. E8-1 is about the polling center or the counting agents which have been appointed by the candidates. E9 is a form in which the election results are declared for those elections which are uncontested. So supposing you have 11 vacancies in the managing committee and there are only 11 applicants, then there is no election that needs to be held, and the SCEA will declare the results as uncontested on form number E9. E10 is a form which is the ballot paper that is to be used for electing members to the managing committee. The next one that comes up is E11, which is a form to be filled up for challenging a voter's identity. So if the officials who are conducting the elections find that a voter has been misrepresented, then in order to challenge the voter's identity, form E11 has to be filled out. E12 is a declaration which is to be signed by a person who is accompanying an infirm or a blind voter. E13 is a form which is a list of infirm and blind voters. So this has to be submitted to the DDR office well in time at the same time as the form E3-1 is being submitted, so that we already have a list of infirm and blind voters, and then we need form E12 declaring the person who will be accompanying the infirm or the blind voter. E14 is a list of those voters who tendered their votes. In other words, those people who cast their votes. E15 is a form that is used to account for ballot papers. Once again, the society officials don't have anything to do with this. This is essentially for the Election Commission officials. E16 is the form in which the Election Commission officials will fill out the result sheet of the elections. And finally, E17 is the declaration of results and publication of names of people who have been elected. Once this process is complete, the SCEA officials will finally send a list of elected representatives to the DDR's office. So this was the whole sequence of the 18 forms, beginning with E1 to E17, and of course there is one additional form, that was the E3-1. So between E1 and E17 there are 18 forms which briefly describe the whole process of elections. All these forms are available on this educational website for your reference, so you can go through the details, and those of you who are in the managing committee can actually take printouts and generate their own forms when required for the election process. I'll now describe to you the timeline of this whole process. So starting with day 1, the first 7 days are these events. The first event is publication of the election program and provisional voters list. And as you can see that it has to be done within a day. The next day of the day on which the election officer has approved the election program, this list has to be published. The next event on this timeline is about inviting claims and objections to the provisional voters list. So the E3 is followed by E3-1. So before publishing E3-1, there is a period of 5 days from the date of publication of the provisional voters list, which have to be corrected and then resubmitted on form E3-1. The third event is decisions on claims and objections on the provisional voters list are done within 2 days from the date of making claims and objections on the provisional voters list. So that is the summary of events during the first 7 days on the timeline of the election program. Continuing further from day 8 onwards, the next event that occurs is the publication of the final voters list. Subsequent to that, 5 days from the date of the publication of the final voters list is the last day for making nominations. So between day 8 and day 13, the candidates who wish to stand for elections will submit their nomination forms. The 7th event is publication of the list of nominations on the last date and after the expiry of the time of nominations on day 13 itself. Subsequently, the next day, the forms are scrutinized. The next event is event 12, which happens a minimum of 5 days after the date of withdrawal of candidature, and that is the declaration of the place, date and time at which the poll will take place. Also, event 13 is within the same time frame, and that is the place and time of counting the votes. And finally, the date of declaration of results is also on the same day as the election is conducted. Now we come to the principle of one member, one vote. We have to understand that one person can have only one vote. If a person holds the share of 2 flats, he would be owning twice the number of shares as compared to a person who owns only 1 flat. Even so, that person who is owning 2 flats will still have only 1 vote. As bylaw 60 says, an individual member may hold more than 1 flat. That doesn't make him eligible for more than 1 vote. This has been clarified by numerous High Court and Supreme Court judgments. And what the judgment of the Supreme Court has repeatedly said is that a member of a cooperative society, notwithstanding the quantum of interest in the capital of the society, has 1 vote in the affairs of the society. Once again, this is also confirmed by section 154BE-11 of the MCS Act. One question that comes to mind is, what are the voting rights of a defaulter? It must be clearly understood that a defaulter is fully eligible to attend a general body meeting and also vote in case any proposition or resolution is put up for voting. However, a defaulter cannot
stand for any election to the managing committee or be nominated or co-opted. This has been stated very clearly in section 154B-10 bracket 4.
This brings us to the end of this presentation. Very briefly, what we saw in this video was that elections require preparation. It begins 6 months before the elections are due. There are different landmarks. There is one landmark at 6 months before the due date, 4 months before the due date, and then we went through the process which takes 35 days, and we also discussed the forms that are used and how those forms affect your preparedness for the elections. The forms are numbered from E1 to E17, including E3-1, 18 forms. All these forms are available for your reference in the section on this website, and we also talked about the timeline. Remember, elections are a very essential part, and if they're not conducted properly, there are consequences which can include severe interruptions to the functioning of the society. So thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, please post them on the forum, or you can invite discussion on any points that you have in mind, and we shall meet once again in the next video. So thank you and namaskar. Bye bye.